It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Kevin Milligan. He is the Assistant General Manager of Riverside's Public Utility. He focuses on water. And so I must speak with you about the water crisis. It's very hot in the Inland Empire. I want to get a sense from you, how severe is this drought?
We are in unprecedented times. The state water condition has really never been worse when we look statewide at where reservoir levels are. Surface water reservoirs are far below normal, and our groundwater basins, unfortunately, are suffering as well.
What's interesting is the LA Times came out with a poll recently. It was a statewide poll. 89% of those that were surveyed characterized the drought as a major problem or a crisis, but only 16% said that they were affected to a major degree. And so there is this schizophrenia where we recognize the severity of the problem, but because we're not feeling it, my guess is we're not taking actions to thwart the crisis.
Right.
Is that what you're seeing in Riverside?
To some extent, yes. Our residents have done a good job with conserving so far this year. I think they're hearing the message. But water agencies in general have done a good job in maintaining service levels. And so we're not seeing that real impetus to, I have to conserve. We haven't implemented drastic mandatory reductions in water use.
Should we?
We've started.
And let's talk about it. That's why I wanted to bring you on today. Riverside, as an example of many cities of its size, mid to large cities in California, has started to impose some restrictions. Let's start with, there's basically 2 to 3 restrictions as I see it. Let's start with the watering of landscape. What's the restriction here in Riverside?
In Riverside, our council recently acted to impose 4 days per week mandatory water restrictions. So we're asking our residents to only water at nighttime, 6 p.m. to 10 a.m., and no more than 4 days per week.
What's interesting is I live in Los Angeles, in the city of. We have a 3-day-a-week restriction. At first I thought, boy, Riverside's being pretty permissive, but then when I come to Riverside, it's hot.
It's hot.
If you only had 2 to 3 days a week, I gotta think you'd see dead landscape.
We would, and we're trying to avoid that. And we've been fortunate with our groundwater basins, although they're lower than we'd like them to be, it's still a good water source for us.
What about users that by definition are just larger in their scope? Schools, cemeteries, whatever it may be. What do you do with them?
So we had some discussions with those large institutional customers. Some of them, because the pipe going to serve their landscape isn't big enough to water within the hours required. It takes longer to go through the irrigation cycle than they could manage. We've allowed them to water outside that 4 day per week if they demonstrate a 15% conservation reduction. And that's really what we're after. Reduce your water use.
Is that doable? I mean, 15%, that's a big number.
It's a big number, but you can keep your grass healthy, your turf healthy with a reduction. It won't be quite as green, won't look quite as vibrant, but it'll stay alive, it'll still look good.
And as I understand it, you're looking just generally for the residents of your jurisdiction to decrease their water usage by 15%.
That's right.
The governor had been asking the residents of California reduce their usage by, I think, 20%. That was back in January. We haven't seen that. I mean, we've seen 1% decrease, 5% decrease. In coastal Southern California, we've seen increases.
Right. So the challenge is, when there's a drought, by definition, it hasn't rained.
Right.
When it doesn't rain, you're not getting that natural precipitation on your landscape. And so to keep it alive, you need to use more water applied from the domestic service.
I also understand that you're asking that dining establishments change their habits. What are you asking them to do?
So we've asked them to only serve water when a customer asks for it.
So as a general proposition, do you believe that when you combine the decrease in watering of landscape plus restricting the amount of water served at restaurants, will that do the trick?
I think it will. I think Riverside residents, they've done a good job already. Those who have done already cut back, thank you very much.
Yes.
We're really happy. Those who can do a little bit more, we're asking them to do a little bit more.
Now, as you know, the State Water Resources Control Board is now authorizing any water agency to impose fines. I understand Riverside already had that authority, but where is Riverside at this stage on the imposition of fines for scofflaws?
So we're not pushing fines. We have the ability to do that. We think voluntary compliance, cooperation. The council asked us to work with residents, to give a courtesy notice, to give a warning, and then we can impose a fine.
How long can agencies be as forgiving as Riverside is being right now? And I'm not trying to be pejorative, but
Right.
how long can we just kind of beg and plead?
Well, we need to see some reduction. We don't know if it's going to rain this winter.
Right.
We don't know what 2015 holds. If we don't see cooperative, voluntary reductions, 2015 might look much different in terms of mandatory restrictions.
What about other incentives? Is Riverside, as an example of any city in California, imposing or offering, I should say, rebates for certain actions, turf or low flow sprinklers, whatever it may be?
Yeah, we have some great programs. We have our free sprinkler nozzle program. Residents, we've just recently expanded that. Residents can get as many sprinkler heads as they need to replace the old spray heads with a new high efficiency sprinkler nozzle. We just upped our turf removal rebate as well from 40 cents a square foot to $2 a square foot.
I want to talk to you about turf because I recently landscaped my backyard, and I really, really, really wanted to put in turf. I mean, at the depth of my core, I wanted to. Aside from the fact that the cost was 4 or 5 times more expensive, that was without rebate. You know, I'm sure if I brought in the rebate, it'd be lower. Turf gets hot. I mean, I just wonder if there's a problem with the product. I mean, it gets blistering hot.
Artificial turf.
Right.
It can, and the new products can get hot. It's not always the most comfortable product. It's good for areas that don't get a lot of use.
So maybe a front yard as opposed to a backyard.
A front yard. I would encourage, though, instead of an artificial turf, to go to a California native landscape. It looks much more beautiful than an artificial turf, and it doesn't use all that water.
Are there rebates for planting natives, California natives?
So Riverside's program will pay you $2 a square foot to remove your turf and replace it with
the real turf,
something
meaning
else.
real
turf,
grass.
Real grass, right. And replace it with either a California native. We also have an artificial turf rebate program, so we'll pay you $2 a square foot to install artificial turf or towards installing artificial turf.
I mean, I have, especially in, for example, the Coachella Valley. I mean, you see some beautiful California native landscapes, and you know, it feels. Look, we live in a desert. You know, even outside of Riverside, Riverside may feel like a desert. I don't care what anyone says. Los Angeles is a desert.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that we realize what we have done. And I'm not trying to point fingers, but we've really transformed a desert into, you know, suburban beauty. But there's a price to pay.
We have, and we've brought very much an East Coast landscape mentality to the West Coast, and it doesn't belong here.
What else can we do, sir? Please give us as many tips as possible, because I know that Californians, we want to help, but in some ways we feel helpless. We don't know what we can do, and you know, we feel like, what is my one, you know, shorter shower going to help? How is that going to really impact the situation?
In inland Southern California, 70% of the water you buy from a water provider like Riverside is used outdoors. So that's where we need you to act. Go out, check your sprinklers, make sure they're properly functioning. Turn down your time clock 5 minutes. Water just a little bit less on your turf. Make sure that your nozzles aren't spraying onto the sidewalk. Don't leave a hose running. If you don't have an automated irrigation system, buy a small sprinkler and attach it and set a timer when you water so you remember to go out and turn it off.
So what do you see for 2015?
Don't know. It makes me a little bit nervous. I'd like to see rain this year.
I can only imagine. Okay, his name is Kevin Milligan. He is the Assistant General Manager of the Riverside Public Utilities. Again, do all that you can to conserve water. We are facing a very severe drought. My name is Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.